We're starting to learn the names of the victims of yesterday's shooting in Allen, Texas. Christian LaCour was one of the 8 people killed at the outlet mall. His older sister tells CNN he was a sweet, caring young man who was loved greatly by our family. Massacre of 8 people at a shopping mall in Allen, Texas yesterday is the latest in a growing list of mass shootings in Texas and across the country. Just 9 days ago, a gunman killed 5 of his neighbors in the small town of Cleveland near Houston. And this month, the country will mark the 1-year anniversary of the Uvalde massacre that took the lives of 19 elementary school students and 2 teachers. But this morning, Texas Governor Greg Abbott said guns are not the core of the problem.
There has been a dramatic increase in the amount of anger and violence that's taking place in America. People want a quick solution. The long-term solution here is to address the mental health issue.
Let's talk about this with our political panel, Republican strategist Alice Stewart and Democratic strategist Maria Cardona. Ladies, thanks so much again, as always. Alice, let's talk about what the governor said there. Are guns at least part of the problem?
Without a doubt. There's no question about it that guns are part of the problem, but they are not the entire problem. Look, I think there is a space at this current time and for quite some time to have a meaningful, common sense conversation about this, and not just about gun control, but as Governor Abbott said, let's look at the mental health aspect. I have always been an advocate for red flag laws, which would take the guns out of the hands of people that have mental challenges that pose a threat to themselves or others. 19 states have passed those, including the District of Columbia. That is a good place to start, as well as looking at the people that are high-risk threat assessments and whether or not those people should have guns. That's where we need to have these conversations. Look, this is not just about what the shooter has in their hand, but it's what they have in their head and their heart that also needs to be a big part of the conversation.
What do you think, Maria?
That is nearly not enough. And if anything has shown us, it's history. We are talking about mass shootings almost every single day, Jim. And at one point, are Republicans going to understand that guns are a major core part of this problem? Mental health issues, absolutely. And let's do everything to make sure that we help everyone with those kinds of issues. But when you have every single country in the world that has the same type of mental health issues, and this country is the only one that has as a health hazard the massive amounts of guns that are available so easily to really anyone who wants one. Fred was on your show earlier, Fred Gutenberg. He said that in the last 20 years, the number of guns has doubled. The number of AK-47s and assault rifles has quintupled. That is not something that a country that has already suffered from massive gun violence, that is not what we need right now. And when Republicans continue to say this is just about mental health, to me that tells me that the NRA and the gun lobby still has their foot on their throats, and they are not understanding the problem, and they are putting our children and Americans at risk.
Is it the NRA? Is that part of the issue?
No,
So you just can't get around the NRA?
No, it's not that at all. The fact is, this is not just about gun control, because we have the right to own guns. And as a law-abiding gun owner, I think the conversation needs to be much more broad than that. You want to bring in Republicans and what Republicans are doing to stand against this. The reality is the majority of gun violence in this country is done in inner cities that are large urban areas in this country led by Democrats. There's not a Republican on the city council in Chicago, in Los Angeles, and New York. That is where we see large numbers of gun violence. And there's no disputing that. That's not a Republican problem. That is a liberal city problem, and that's where a large part of the gun violence is.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it drives me nuts when I hear this on television and there's no pushback. So here's the pushback. If you look at numbers, the major crime numbers, the major places where crime takes place in this country are in red states, not in blue states. And in terms of urban crime, yes, there is a lot of gun violence that goes on in urban crimes. Washington, D.C. is one of them. And Washington, D.C. has one of the strictest gun control laws on the books. But guess what? We are next to Virginia, one of the most lax states that has essentially anybody who can get a gun can go get it in Virginia. So if you have cities that have great gun control laws next to places where you can get essentially a gun by, driving out to a place and asking for it, It doesn't work. That's why you need federal gun control laws that will focus on keeping our kids safe.
And Alice, what do you make of some of this reporting coming into CNN that the gunman in Allen may have been motivated by right-wing extremism? We've seen that happen before. Remember in Texas, the El Paso Walmart mass shooting. Can GOP leaders do more? I mean, yes, we can talk about guns, we can talk about mental illness, but what about this rampant sort of right-wing, neo-Nazi, white supremacist extremism that is going on social media? What can Republican leaders do to tamp that down?
I think it's incumbent upon all leaders on both sides to encourage to lower the temperature and do away with hate speech on all sides of the spectrum. It's very premature to point a finger at exactly what motivated this person in this recent shooting here, but it's incumbent upon all elected officials to do everything we can to reduce hate speech across the board.
You know, the other point here, Jim, is that the majority of the American people want more gun safety laws. Universal background checks. Would you be okay with that? That's something that the majority of the American people want. Banning assault rifles. Why do we need an assault rifle to make sure that we are going with the Second Amendment, right? The Second Amendment does not say you have a right to an assault rifle. So these are the common sense things that the vast majority of Americans want. And if it wasn't for the gun lobby, we would have those. That's what Republicans need to face.
Alice, let me sneak in a question about the presidential race. Washington Post ABC poll has former President Donald Trump leading President Biden in a hypothetical matchup by 7 points. Are you surprised by that? Is this an outlier?
Well, of course, that's what my dear friend Maria will say. But look, these are all snapshots in time when we have a poll like this. But the truth is the trend is not looking good for President Biden. You look a week ago, the hypothetical generic matchup between him and Donald Trump, Biden was ahead by 3. And a hypothetical match up between him and Ron DeSantis, who is the other GOP challenger, DeSantis was ahead just by a few points. Now, fast forward 1 week, we're seeing the poll numbers where Biden would lose to not just Donald Trump, but Ron DeSantis in a hypothetical matchup. And even more so in that Washington Post poll, this must go without saying, another part of that poll shows that people were questioning on whether or not they felt as though President Biden had the mental acuity to run for president and to be president again. Mental acuity to be the president.
Does Donald Trump have the mental acuity?
Well, that's in terms of Biden, 20% of Democrats said he didn't have the mental acuity. 70% of independents said he didn't have the mental acuity. Obviously, 94% of Republicans.
Maria,
but they're concerned about whether he is mentally fit to be the president.
Maria, you also have to be a little concerned, though. I mean, when you see a poll number like that.
We always have to be concerned. And I've said this many times. That's how we win, right? And this question about mental acuity and Joe Biden's age is getting kind of old, Jim. I mean, this is something that President Biden has faced for so long. We talked about this last week,
But he
right?
himself said it's a legitimate issue.
Yes, he has said that.
Yeah.
And it will continue to be asked. And the way that they answer it is by delivering. He has a massive record to run on. This poll, I do believe it's an outlier, but regardless, it's a year and 9 months to the election, and when most likely Joe Biden's opponent will be Donald Trump, who may very well be running his campaign from jail. I think the contrast between Joe Biden, who has delivered massively for the American people, and Donald Trump, criminal, I think that's what this is going to be about.
All right, we'll see what the next poll says. All right, Maria, Alice, thank you very much. Appreciate it.